I was looking, there are some open source softwares for it. Mostly what I'll do is just get rid of the empty spots. You know, the spots where I'm helping people and there's long dead, I'll try to cut those out. Not sure why I haven't done a link to Visual Studio here on the, just pinned it to the. Also, everything I'm going to do today is already up on GitHub. I've been doing it at home because I can upload it at home without problem. It also is good to rehearse it, see what kind of problems could be in lying in wait. All right. So I'm going to zoom a little. All right, so I presume this is the right one. I did several of them because I was trying to get the GitHub to work. I'm assuming the last one I used was. That seems too big. So minus that for a minute. So this is the what we did last time with the registration controller. Just a quick review. You know, again, you make the link to the models. You have to do the entities. You always have to, this one puts the reviewers on the index page. You don't have to do that, but you could if you wanted. This just returns an empty view for the form. You have to have that. You have to have an empty view. And then down here, this is the view that is same thing, action result register, action result register. It basically is the same thing, but it has the post and the validation. This means that after they've clicked the button, right? Oh, the other thing that I did this weekend, which I didn't get posted, but I will, is I looked up error trapping. And it's, as you might expect, more complicated than you might think. You can create an error trapping class that handles most of the, and then just refer to it when you want to do error. There's two types of errors, and I will post all this, but I'm not ready to teach it yet. There's C# errors, and then there's HTTP errors, things that come from the not finding something, right? Or an error where it just crashes from the website. So you have to handle both kinds of errors if you don't want it to crash. All right, so this is a little bit weird, and I'm showing it again because we're going to do something very similar. The bind, include, equals. This is a way of creating a class, defining a class on the fly. And the binding that you're doing are the fields that are coming in, right, from the form. So everything that you want from the form has to be in here. They don't have to be in the same order as the form because they're named, right? The fields are named in the form thing. So it'll find the one that's named the same, but they do have to have the same names. So these are the names in the class. And then we declare the type of class, reviewer, which is part of our entities. I just did R because down here it's easier to write R. A lot of the examples, and I think my example online uses reviewer with a lowercase r, which could be a little confusing because the difference is case. This is the stored procedure which we loaded with the entities, and it takes these fields in this order. The thing about the stored procedure is they do have to be in that order, and every field has to be passed through. If it's blank on the form, and if it allows nulls, it'll be fine. Does that make sense? I don't know if any of these are allowed to be null, but there are a couple in the person, like the city and the state can be null because there are default values for those in the database. But if any field is required, it'll crash if you don't do it. The stored procedures return a 1 if they succeed and a -1 if they fail. That's just something C plus stored procedures do. They have an int result, and it's 1 if they succeed and -1 if they fail. So if it's not a -1, then I'm going to return it to index, and you'll see the new person. Next time we're going to do it to the result page. And then this just returns the empty view again. If it fails, it just goes back to the form. Does that make sense? That's what we did last time. Are we ready to move on or no? Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't do the part where you wrote db.reviewers.
You shouldn't have to do that for the assignment.
Okay.
What this does is it puts all the reviewers on the index page. And I did that so that when we wrote the new reviewer, you could look back and see if it was there. You don't have to do that. You can always look over here in the Server Explorer, and you can, open that and you can do a query or whatever to look at it. That was just a quick, so we could look to see if the reviewers were there. In real life, you probably wouldn't want to do this. If you had several hundred reviewers, you don't want a web page that goes on forever, unless there's a good reason to show them all. And if you did, you'd probably want to figure out how to page it. It's not necessarily good web design to put that there. Okay. So I need, did I close my, I think my Solutions Explorer thing is gone. You can always get something back by going back to View, and there's my Solution Explorer. Any window you lose, you can get back by going to View. And it's really possible to lose windows here. And I think I showed you before, you can float these, which is really wonderful if you have multiple computer screens, because you could float your toolbars over on one window and have the code on another window. And if you're like my daughter, have a chat on another window. But anyway, for these, I tend to prefer them anchored. So what I'm going to do, I guess I need to zoom up for this, for the sides, is I'm going to add another model. And so we haven't had to do this on the example one. You guys did it for the person class, but I'm going to add a class to the model. And this class will be just a C#, and I'm going to call it login class. I don't want to necessarily call it just login, although you could probably get away with that because it's login sort of a reserved word. So I'm going to do add. And there's really only two things we need in the login class. Although I may add a constructor. Somebody asked if you can add constructors, and you can. What are the things that we need in the login class? Yeah, so we need the username. So that'd be public string username set get, and then we need the password, right? And then it's just a string at the level of entering it here. So I'm going to add a constructor. You don't have to, which would allow us just to pass the two things in at once. So in C#, a constructor is the same name as the class. So I'm going to say public login class. And I am going to, actually, first of all, I'm going to make an empty constructor. It complains if you don't have an empty constructor in these data classes. So that's an empty constructor. And then I'm going to override it. And I'm going to take in string user name. Let's just do user. String password. I think I just want to do, well, I guess I can do word. And I'm going to say user name equals user. And password equals password with a lower, can't type it. So this is really not super necessary, but it allows us to enter the, when we declare the password, we can enter the username and password all at once. You guys, most of you did Python. Have you guys ever seen constructors? So constructors are ways of initializing the class. Okay. They're part of object-oriented programming. So this is an empty constructor. What it does is it basically just sets everything to default. Yes. When you say something, make something new, it basically runs a constructor. If you do not declare a constructor, there is a default constructor. And what the default constructor does is it reduces everything to 0 or empty string or null, right? Whatever the lowest value for that thing is. That's if you do nothing. Now, one of the problems with the default constructor is that it won't run if you make your own constructor. So when I make this constructor, string user, string password, we're creating a constructor that if they pass in these parameters, then we want to assign them to these fields. There are two ways to initialize this class, with nothing or with two parameters. And how does it know which? If there are parameters, it knows them through the parameter one. If there are no parameters, it does the other one. Does that make sense? You can always use the gets and sets on these and ignore the constructors. I mean, if you do the empty constructor, you have to use the gets and sets. Object-oriented programming is actually really interesting and has a lot of in and outs. Sometimes it reads like philosophy. You know, in terms of what makes a class, what makes something encapsulated, what makes for good inheritance. I mean, it can be complicated. Anyway, I did those. Just somebody had asked a question about constructors there. Oh, okay. And again, it would work just fine without either of those. Right. This is just giving us some flexibility.
Did you say C# insists on an empty constructor?
So if you don't write any, no, C# doesn't insist on an empty constructor, but MVC does. Does that make sense? The model view control template that they have.
So we couldn't have it with just the one.
I tried that and I got errors. Okay. It says there's no empty constructor, so I have to make an empty constructor. Okay. And the only reason I did it this weekend and I got errors because I didn't have an empty constructor. So. Okay. I think it's because it has to, when you do the initial, like in the logging class, there is a, at the top when you say you're using models login, the first time it loads, it has to be able to load empty. Does that make sense? And then you can apply that in. Yeah, when you pass it on, then it can have those. But I think it has to be able to load empty because of the way the form loads. Okay. Other questions? Is this making sense? Okay. I'm going to make one other class while we're here. So again, I'm adding it to the model, and it's just a class. And I'm going to call it, if you've already made this, you don't have to remake it. I'm going to call it message. And this one I'm just going to give it the one value. So I'm going to say public string message text set get. Now I did this. I tried a lot of different things. There are other ways to do what this message class will do. This message class can be used by any form, right? Any constructor. You're just going to pass things off. It's just a way of storing a message. There's another thing called view bag where you can store strings and things and pass them off. But this actually is more reliable. It's just to create a class to store that message. Thing about C# is that everything is a class, right? Everything is an object. So even if you're just passing a string, it's easiest to do it as an object. All right, so those two things. Questions on those? Do you need more time with them? Yeah, the login class, at a minimum, you just need these two lines. The other two are constructors. Now, I intend to actually use this constructor when I declare the login, so you might want them. Yeah.
What's a person key?
What?
Person key.
So in the database, it would be the reviewer key in this one, but in the other one, it's a person key. Every record has a key, right? And a primary key. It could be called an ID. I called it a key. All right. So every record in the database has a key field, which uniquely identifies it. So the person key is the one that uniquely identifies that person in the database.
Are we going to need it for the...
Yeah, we need it. We won't actually need it for what we're doing today, but we will need it for what we do next week. Right, so we're going to write it into a session, and the idea of a session variable is that you can control as long as the person's on the website. So if they've logged in, you can keep track of the fact that they're logged in. And if they're not logged in, you can deny them viewing certain things. You got it? The other thing that I will say, if I will try to be slow enough, but if you need to, it's all up on the GitHub too. Pretty much identical to what I'm doing now. The other thing I've been doing since I'm doing the GitHub at home is I've been adding comments to my code. So if you go to the GitHub, there'll be comments explaining things as well as just So let's go back. Now we've got the model, right? So what we want to do now is a controller. You always, everything is always model, view, control, right? So you've got the model and you got the controller and you got the views. Usually the controller is the beginning place. How is it going over there? 24%. So I am going to add a controller. This will be an empty controller. I'm going to add it, and I will call it login controller. And as always, the login controller basically gives you the controller. And also, there's now a login view over here, right? Right-click on controller and just do new add controller, and then empty controller and login controller. So everything is distributed according to all these folders, right? So it's just a matter of knowing which folder things go in. Controllers go in the controller folder, views go in the view, and each set of views has its own folder. So each controller has its own folder of views. So we get index for free. You could change index if you want. You could call it registration or something. Just to reiterate though, the names of these views or the names of these methods has to match to the name of the view.
You get an error.
Yeah, or you get an error. It doesn't know what's going on if you don't do that. So I am going to, first of all, I'm going to do using my book report MVC Winter 2018 .models because we want to get access to the models. The first one is just going to be to return the form, so I'm going to leave it empty. I will leave it as index. Sounds fine to me. And then I'm going to do HTTP post and validate anti-forgery token. Whoops, which I didn't get. I don't know if this one is required, but it's always there, so I'm going to use it.
Is that basically like the C# ASP equivalent of doing HTML special pairs in PHP?
So it might be. These are what they call compiler directives. But basically what this says is that it's going to be accept a post from the form. Now I don't know if there's so there's post and get, right? I don't know if there's a get equivalent. Get is the one that shows it across the top, right? So I'm sure post is a little bit better.
There is a HTTP get.
Is there one? So you could do a get probably instead of a post if you wanted.
When we need to edit something.
Maybe. I mean, if you needed to edit the URL.
No, I mean when we need to edit like person information, we need to get the information from the database and put it in the form.
That doesn't do, the get doesn't do that.
No?
Get is like post. Well, if you wanted to do that, you would have to do kind of like we did on the other thing. Basically, you would pull up the record, and then you would just write the text value of the text fields to be equal to the ones from the query. Maybe we'll do that. One of the ways you could see that is if you looked at the edit from the probably in the business rules, because it does a query and then it writes the fields from the query to the text files. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to do this again as public action result index, but this one's going to take some arguments, square bracket, bind, parentheses, include, and we've only got 2 fields here, so we want user name and password. And then we need to give this thing a name, this class, so I'm going to call it, so one of the things I'm going to do, since I'm so zoomed here, I'm going to break the line. No, it won't break. Why won't it break? Oh, well. We need to give it a name. So login class first, right? It has to match the name of the class we created. I'm just going to call it LC. I guess it's all on screen. Okay, and then I did curly braces. This is still, the index is still underlined because we have to return a view. We'll do that in a minute. So what this bind does, again, it's a directive kind of like this. It tells it to take these values from the form and bind it to the fields in this class. And then this is the local instance of the class, right? LC in my case, but you can name it whatever you want. Does that make sense? we're going to get the fields from the form and bind them to the class. Okay, so then I'm going to, and if all this stuff is fairly mysterious, as I said, it's a very artificial system. There's no way, you probably would be just think it through. It would take a long time. It took probably a small army of people at Microsoft to come up with it. So I'm going to do the book review database entities. So equals new book review database entities, because we will need access to the stored procedure, which belongs to the entities. And I'm going to do int. I don't know if I want to name it result. I've done that before. The reason I'm hesitating is that I was going to name the other page result. Anybody have a good name? It's just for what we get back.
Response?
Yeah, except that's a keyword too. Yeah, that's actually an idea. Let's do it lowercase. So basically what we want to do is db.usp reviewer login. And if you look again, when you do the parentheses, it gives you what it wants. It wants username and password. So I can do lc.username, comma, lc.password. This is easier than the person one because there's just fewer fields. So just like the other store procedure, it will return either 1 or -1. So if it doesn't equal -1, which means it worked, then we want to do a couple of things. You guys with me? We'll give you a second. Okay, so we're going to actually do a query. And I'm going to get the user ID or key equals, I don't know if we've done this before, from r in db.reviewers where r dot, why is it not giving me the IntelliSense? All right. Well, we're r dot reviewer username. What is it not? From r in db.reviewers.
Is it because you need to do lc.user reviewer username?
Well, I'm going to, but this one is db. See, db dot, what it does is it gives me a list of the classes in the entity. But it's saying it doesn't find it. Why? Sees it. I think it's just not done. Let's see what happens when it gets done. And that should be a capital E. LC.username. So this is where we match. And then what I want to do is select lowercase. So we want to select R dot, and again, it review her key, and just, it's weird to me that it's not giving me that without error.
Again, it's working.
Yeah, it should be working. There's no reason for it not to be working. That should work. I just don't know why it's not liking DB reviewers. Yeah, I want it there. Yeah. First or default is what we want there. Does it? Do you have parentheses around it? You do need that. Why is it not liking? Let me build. It just says DB set reviewer. Reviewer is there. I'm just going to run a refresh. I don't know that it will do any good. I'm not sure why it's giving me. Oh, okay. So if you ever need to do that, I did a right click in here and did refresh, but I don't know that it's going to help. You guys have said yours is fine?
I got certain errors that are with squiggly lines, but under different words and meaning.
Well, the index is fine. That's because we haven't returned a view. Where? And I returned models. That seems like a few too many, or a few too few usings. Did I lose some usings?
Yeah, I did.
What were the other usings?
The one that mine is currently not very out, but we're missing is system.link.
LI.
And Q.
Oh, link. That's why. That actually is why.
There's a few others that are grayed out.
Yeah, because this is link. How could I lose link? Anyway, this is link. That's what they call this. Have we done anything like that before in here? So it's like a SQL query, except it's upside down a little bit.
say, it looks like backwards SQL.
So actually, this is the order in which SQL is actually processed. If you were to write an SQL statement, this is actually what it would do underneath, is it would first figure out what the table is, it would figure out what the criteria is, and then it would go get the fields.
That
Right.
makes sense.
So that's how SQL is processed. It's not how it's written, but that's how it's processed. This, so LINQ is basically one of the things that most programmers really dislike about SQL in code is that it's just a string, right? So when it fails on the database side, and there's no way to debug it inside the inside the code. You basically have to run it, have it fail, figure out why it failed, and then fix it, and then run it again to see if it works, etc. So the SQL string is a bit of a pain. What they did is they codified it so it's part of the compilable code. And again, with the entities, it knows what the tables are, it knows what the collections are, and things like that. And so it's a debuggable version of SQL in some ways. It works with other things too. You can use the same LINQ for querying XML, for querying arrays, for querying lists. You can use it to query pretty much anything. It was meant to be a universal query language within the code, So as long as there's a data source that can recognize it has some structure, it can query it. All right, the first default there is because I want to only return one value. There should only be one ID for that particular reviewer. If that makes sense, that's logging in. So it's going to return this, but even though it would only return one value, you have to put first or default because if there's any chance it isn't trusting you that it's only going to return one value. So it's going to say, I'm going to take the first one or the default value for this. What else? Equals, you could do equal if you want. Guys, there's a few of you that have done Java. Equals is when you're comparing strings. Comparing strings is a little bit weird. So equal works in C#, but equals is better. And in Java, I think you have to use equals when comparing strings. I don't think equal works for strings in Java. Anybody taken Java recently to remember? All right, so what we're returning is the ID. And so the thing is that it's a var right now. So I'm going to do int. This will be, I'm going to call it R key, reviewer key, is going to equal int UID. Does anybody know what that's doing? Yeah, we're casting it to an int. Because the key is an integer, right? So we need to cast it to an int. Because of the way that this var works, it's an int with a question mark, which is a little bit weird. It is kind of an int, but not quite. This casts it into a true int. And then I'm going to do session, square brackets. I'm going to give the session a name. So it's actually also session 0. You can have multiple sessions and they can be numbered. They also have a key, but we won't worry about that. But I'm just going to call it reviewer key. And I'm going to say it equals, I'm going to assign R key as a value to it. Sessions are stored on the server, and you can use them to test who's, the user. You can use them to store things for the user. It's the other way to do this is with brain just went cookies. The other way to do this is with a cookie. One of the things about web pages, you might have, if you've done any other web development, is that they're stateless. They can't store variables in memory. All right, so you have to store them on either on the server side or on the client side. Cookies are for the client side. Sessions are stored on the server side. Which is better? It kind of depends, you know. All right, one last thing I'm going to do is I am going to then redirect. So I'm going to say return action. Actually, I think it's redirect to action. Oh, and actually, before I do this, so we'll call it result. And I'll put in this, which doesn't exist yet. I should have done it first. I'm going to say our class that we made. And if you made it for the other one, you don't have to make a new one, right? The message class can be used anywhere. I'm going to say message MSG equals new message. I'm going to use the constructor that I made. So I'm going to say thank you. And I think I'm going to do a plus and username. Just so LC username, lc.username plus, and let's just break this. I'm just curious. No, I didn't do it. Plus, so I'm going to say for logging in, logging, you can now donate or apply for assistance. Is that how you spell assistance? All right, and probably want a space there. Okay, so I just broke the line so that. So what is it not like about message? Does not contain a constructor that takes one argument. Oh, I did. So let's do. You're right. I didn't. I did at home, but I didn't here. Message dot message text equals. Okay. Now, what is it not like? Oh, because I didn't do a semicolon. All right, so if we're successful, it should translate this message. It should pass this message to result, which doesn't exist yet, right? And then I'm going to do one other thing. So if it doesn't succeed, I'm going to return. So let's actually just do another message. This one can't have the same name as the other one. So I'm going to return the view result, which should be in quotes. And then comma message. So if no, and this should be message. If a view takes a parameter, you just follow it with a comma and you can list the parameters. But we need to make that view not only the view, but we need to make the a method for it. And then we'll spend a minute walk through this again. So I'm going to do public action result, and it's going to be result, and it's going to take a message, and I'm just going to put M. And then it needs to return view with the message in it. If you don't have this, this is where some of you are having the result won't work. Even though you've named it up here, you have to have, for every view, there has to be a method. Does that make sense? And result is a method, a view that always takes a parameter.
Go back to message class real quick.
Yeah, so all I have in the message class is a single, where is my message class? I think it's up here somewhere. Just has public string message text. I was treating it like it had a constructor because I think I made that at home, but I didn't here.
Because I got in there it says does not contain a constructor that takes one argument.
Well, so when I did the message text, I had to take anything out of here. Notice it's now empty text. And then I changed it to message.message text equals. So you can't put anything in the parentheses because there's no, we didn't make a constructor to do that. So down here I had to do the same thing. And then message.message text equals. You have to use the field rather than the constructor.
It still isn't going to build until it's ready to view, though,
Right, yeah, it's because there's no views for it right now. There is actually there's nothing for it right now. One of the things that's a little bit weird is you have to build the controller. You need to go down. You have to build the controller before you build the views. You could build the views first, but it's to me it makes more sense to build the controller first. But if they don't both exist, nothing will work. You want to walk through from the top, or do you guys have it? And you're still updating.
Yep.
All right. Let me know if you need help with anything after. So walk through, no, yes, you guys got it. That makes sense?
repetition.
Repetition's good or bad? I'll do a quick walkthrough from the top. All right. So one of the things that was missing was link, which we needed. So this is the login controller. So the first index is empty. You need that empty index in order to return the form blank. All right, so this is just, all it does is return the view, whatever it is. We added the post and validate so that it will, I'll wait for that to pass. So we added the post and validate so that this second index will take whatever is submitted by the form. We're binding the class, the fields, to the new login instance of the login class, which in my case I just called LC. We're invoking the entities that we did before because that's where the store procedure is. We're getting a result from the store procedure, the USB reviewer. We pass in the username and the password. And again, this was pre-built in the database by me earlier, right? Just for consistency. If you want to look at them sometime, I'm happy to show you what they look like. The result will be -1 or 1, depending on if it succeeds or fails. So if it succeeds, meaning it's not -1, we're going to look up the user, get their ID, cast it to an integer, and store it in a session variable. We're not going to use the session variable today, but we will next week. I created a message to thank them for logging in. This is all assuming that it's successful. And I returned a redirected action to the result view, and we're passing the message. Okay. If it fails, and I don't have to do an else because there's a return up here, so it'll stop if that's the case. It won't ever get to this bottom part. But if it fails, if it comes down here, then I do an invalid login message and return the same thing. I return the view with the message. And then in order to have this result view, I have to have a method for it in the controller. And the name is result. It has to have the same name. And then it takes in a parameter of message. And then we return the view with the message. Does that make sense?
Yeah, might won't fail.
Well, it probably won't work because we don't have the views.
Okay.
Yeah, so we need the models, we need the MVC, and we need the link. There might be more there. There should be more. I don't know how I deleted them. Possibly. It might have, but I don't know why it would have taken link out. I mean, that was gone before I did the refresh because that's where the error was coming from, I think. Because it didn't understand this because of the, it wasn't, I mean, not that, but the link statement because there was no library there. All right, so I'm going to do the views now, and then we'll be kind of done once we do the views. So there is over here, if we go down, whenever you create a controller, it creates a folder for the views. So I called it login controller, so my views are called login. So I'm going to add a view, and it needs to be named index, the first one. You could have, if you named it something else, you could name it whatever you want, but it has to have the same name as the method. So if I named it something other than index, I would have had to name the method something else. Does that make sense? You can use whatever name you want, but they have to match. So first thing I'm going to do, get rid of this little notice, but I'm going to add an at model, and in the name of my project, which is book. Why is it not giving me? Oh, that should be a lowercase m. I guess that's the, maybe not. There it goes, book review, MVC, models. And the model I want is the login class. And I'm going to change this to login. You don't change the view bag title because that's important, but I don't need login in. All right. For the form, I always cheat. I'm going to go to categories controller. If you have something, anything you want, I'm just going to steal, not the controller. I want to go to the form. Categories, create. I'm going to steal the whole form there. I did categories. If you don't have categories, if you have reporter, or do you have another one that you did? I'm just stealing the create. You can also do your registration form for that matter. You don't need everything in it, but we need a couple of fields. I do this because this is such a pain to type. But we can walk through it. If you want, it's at using HTML begin form. The forgery token. We do a class form horizontal, which is, again, a bootstrap thing. Instead of category here, I am going to do what do I already did login. Let's just do authentication. You can change it. I'm going to where it says category name here, I'm just going to change that to username in all 3 instances. This needs a capital U. And then I'm going to copy that whole div. And then, as I said, we could walk through it. It's not, there's only 2 of these here, so this would be password. And you could have, one of the things that if you want extra credit, you can figure out how to mask the password text box. I was reading up on it, and then I decided it wasn't worth my effort. But it should be. I mean, you'd want to do that. Yeah.
So can you do a reCAPTCHA with this?
Can you what?
Can you do put a reCAPTCHA to this?
I'm not sure what.
A Google reCAPTCHA form?
I don't think so. Well, you maybe. You might be able to. That's actually a good question.
And did you want to duplicate that HTML validation summary line as well?
Yeah, I think that goes with it's part of the validation of that particular field. So every field, let's just walk through a field in case if you just want to write it by hand. It has that validation summary. That's what the validation attribute in the controller refers to, I think. What it does, I don't know if it matters a whole lot, but what it does is it keeps you from typing certain kinds of characters that are associated with scripting attacks, right? So it'll keep you from doing like curly braces and other things. Once you've got the validation, text danger, I'm not sure, is this class, because it's an ACT class, I think it's a built into the MVC as opposed to being a CSS class. You do a label for, and basically this is the label for the text box. And then you do an editor for. Editor for is the text box. So we're doing an editor for username, all right? And then we're doing the validation message for that text box if you do it. Now, I suspect that if you really wanted to, you could probably lose the validation and just do the label for and the editor for, right? Because that would give you the label in the text box. This is exactly the same thing. I did it twice. I just changed the name of the field. This is the button. I'm going to change it to login instead of create. The text is what shows up as the thing. And I do believe you don't need this back to list. In fact, I'm going to delete that. But you do probably need these scripts, the scripts tag. And again, to me, the easiest thing to do with this is just to copy and then edit it. If you want to write it from scratch, you certainly can. The IntelliSense is there. It could lead you through. You guys need a minute on this one? From any of the create forms or something, you could grab this from the validator to the bottom div, right? That's basically a field definition. And you could just copy and paste that anywhere and then just change the model values to whatever is your current model.
You just need a password and username. Right?
That's all we need is password and username. Yes. I should probably type it all out for you at some point, but it's, as I said, it's tedious. You notice the add HTML. I think that's the Razor thing that basically gives you access to most of the HTML level controls. It looks nice once you actually run this, so we'll do that in a bit, but we still have one more form to make. So again, the model is important, login class. We have two fields, username, password. And then we need the button, and we need, I think you need this jQuery scripts at the bottom too. I think all the validation is done by calling those jQuery scripts. Let me know when we're ready to do the very last thing. Well, second to last thing. You ready? Ready? Dana, you ready? Okay. All right, so I'm going to make another form. All these forms have to be in place before you can run anything. So I'm going to add another view. This one is called result. It'll be actually very simple. I'm going to do @model, and then the name of my thing, which is book report MVC Winter 2018. Also, should mention just quickly that that's not the name on GitHub, because I didn't name my one at home the same. I'll show you in a minute. This one we want message, right? Because we're bringing the message over. And here I am just going to do P, and I'm going to do @HTML dot display. I think it's just display text for model dot message text, and then we close the parentheses. So it's a lot like what we did before, except we're just getting the message text out of the class there. So I'm just saying display text for model, and I put it in paragraph tags. It'll work even if you don't put it. So let's try to log in. Are we ready? One of the first things that I might, there's actually one other thing. Let's just do it real quickly. I'm going to go to the layout, and I'm going to add a link at the top. Again, the easiest way is probably to copy this, although you don't have to. And I'm going to call this one login. And I'm going to, we'll do it as index, and this is login is the folder. Not our login, but login. So the text you want to display, the file name, and the folder name. What?
Or what?
This is under shared layout. And this is the menu, right? This is the menu for it. This part isn't necessary to make it run. But I was going to did I spell categories wrong there? Interesting. So one of the things that I need to do probably before I run this, and I could run it from there, but I'm going to go to the Server Explorer. You guys don't need to do this necessarily. Why is it not giving me any tables? Just do it this way. I'm going to do a new query. I need a password, right? I need a valid password. So I'm going to do select star from reviewer. And we'll run that. So unlike Community Assist, I have a built-in, I have the plain password here as well as the hashed one. In Community Assistant, there is no plain password in the text. There's only, but everybody has the same pattern. Last name, period, or last name, capital P pass. And I think it's capital for their last name too. So like if their last name was Anderson, it would be Anderson pass. Right? That everyone in Community Assist has the same password pattern. Here I didn't do that, so I'm going to, I say I have Conger pass. And username is sconger, so I guess I'll do that. So I'm going to go back to I guess this is my login, so let's run it. I'm going to run it from the login. Slowly. I might unzoom a little. All right, so here's my login form. That looks kind of nice. I mean, Bootstrap is always reliable. So my name there was sconger, right? And my password was congerpass. Thank you. So it says thank you for logging in, right? So it's pass the message. You can now donate or apply for assistance. I'm going to go back to login. I'll do the same thing, but let's do instead of conger pass, let's say pass, which is wrong. And it says invalid login. All right, so it goes to that. This is what I did in the shared, is go there. And if you go back to register on the index, gives you this, and then you can register. So we have all of these things. So that's the login. Questions on that?
I got a compiler error on my login folder.
Okay.
It says under public action results message class. It says the modifier public is not valid. 30 seconds.
I will look. Let me stop this. Yeah, if you don't have sconger, you might need to do somebody else. So if I go back to that query, and zoom that up maybe. So like Greg Martin is G Martin pass. Mary G is Mary password. I wish I'd been more W Lewis pass. Jason pass for Jason Anderson. I think everybody up till me is in the database that you have. Anyway, I was going to stop the video and then I'll come troubleshoot.